Hello and welcome to another episode of Motors for the Masses, and today I want to draw your attention to 14 Chinese motorcycles that I think are definitely worth buying. So let's roll the intro and get cracking. Now, when I say motorcycles, I mean pretty much motorcycle manufacturers, but not all of the bikes in their range. Let me explain. First of all, with CF Moto. Now, I'll be honest, I don't think I've found a CF Moto that I don't like. I think they are brilliant bikes. I love the engines. I love the way they're built. I love the way they ride. They're just fantastically built, superb quality, speedy, grunty, pretty looking machines. Now, as you should know by now, CF Moto have been partnered with KTM for quite a few years. In a lot of their designs they use Kiska, who are the designers for KTM. And KTM use CF Moto based engines, and CF Moto engines are now used in a lot of manufacturers. In fact, a few in this list that I've got. But as I say, I don't think I've found a CF Moto that I don't like. I am surprised that CF Moto don't really do a 125 in the UK. You just can't get a 125. However, they do a 250. The only thing that frustrates me about CF Moto is how they did a 250 and a 300 and a 400 of pretty much the same bike. That to me was ridiculous. But the 800 MT Adventure bike, absolutely brilliant. The 700 CLX Adventure, brilliant bike. I love the way it rides, the way it feels, everything, the way it's built is superb, and that's the good thing about it, superb build quality. The 450 SR, a great bike, absolutely brilliant. That 270-degree crank, that lovely sounding, speedy little sports bike, absolutely brilliant. The 300 was okay, and the 300 range was okay, but 300cc bikes are not really that quick in modern times. They're like glorified 125s that will hold you at 70 rather than desperately try and struggle to get to 70. But yeah, CF Moto I have found a superb manufacturer, and I don't think, as I say, I don't think there's any that I don't like. Now, I've ridden a lot of CF Motos, and in the description below will be links to all the videos I've done on the manufacturers that I'm going to be talking about. There are a couple I haven't ridden, and I will tell you those, but I look forward to riding versions of their bike in the future. But yeah, so number one, CF Moto, a brilliant purchase, a fantastic machine, and well worth buying this Chinese manufacturer's vehicles. So now on to the second one, and that is Voge. Now recently I've done a video on the Voge DS900X. The link again in the description below. Now the interesting thing about Voge is that they seem to have a good relationship with Lonsin and their engines, who provide the engines for older BMWs. Most specifically, the DS900X uses the old style 850 GS, or the F850 GS engine. The Voge DS650X used the old single cylinder BMW engine. Absolutely brilliant thumper in that, really nice feeling bike, and despite it being a single cylinder, I didn't really get any issues with the vibration. A tiny bit of vibration, but only at the top end, and that's because you are riding a thumpy single cylinder, whereas most manufacturers are using parallel twins now. But yeah, I really love the Voge bikes and what they're bringing through. We had a Voge 300 Rally here that Patrick and I took out a few times, and I rode quite a few times, and that was brilliant. Off-road and off-road, a lot of fun. Nice little bike. I haven't really ridden the 125s, but I haven't heard anything bad about them. The funny thing is that when I was at Moonrakers the other day testing the 900, there was a lad in there who had just brought his bike in that he'd seized the engine on. I don't know what it was, but he traded that in for Voge, so that was quite interesting. So yeah, Voge, a fantastic manufacturer and well worth looking at. Now I'm just going to pause for a second here and talk about why I feel Chinese manufacturers are great. Now, a couple of videos ago, I did a video on 16 Chinese bikes that blatantly copied the other manufacturers. Now, this was mostly on design, not really anything else, because the engines were nothing like it. Now, these, I think, again, are bikes that are designed for the Chinese market, because they couldn't really sell them in the Western market because they'd just get sued for it. So in China, they were doing all these copy look motorcycles and getting away with it. So that video is very different. I know a lot of people were talking about Chinese bikes in that video, but that was just more of a design thing that the Chinese were copying, that were blatant rip-offs of Western, I say Western, you know what I mean, the bikes that we have in the rest of the world. But this is about manufacturers that are really, really coming through. And again, China has had a bad reputation for quite a while. And that's because stigma is very easy to get, but very difficult to get rid of. The same thing happened 30, 40 years ago with Japanese bikes. It was all about British bikes, all this Japanese rubbish coming through, we're not interested in any of that, blah, 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 blah. And then look, it took over the world. And China is the new Japan. I mean, I can probably guarantee that you're watching this maybe on a phone. If you've got an iPhone, American company, built in Shenzhen in China. If you've got a Samsung phone, Korean company, used to be in Shenzhen in China. But now China is actually a bit too expensive for Samsung, and they've outsourced a lot of their factories to Vietnam. It's all sorts of stuff. If you're watching it on a PC, I can guarantee 90% of the components that are in your PC were built in China. Everything around us. Now, we know there's a whole array of utter tripe that comes out of China, but they've always had variations of a product. So they have the ones they'd be happy to sell up for peanuts to the people in their own country, and the ones that are better quality, that pass quality control, that come to the rest of the world. More recently, because of the internet, because of the likes of eBay and Amazon and Taobao and all that, a lot of Chinese manufacturers are going, well, we can produce them for peanuts, they're crap quality, but we can sell them to the Western market. And that's why we've been getting a lot of tripe come through. But I think that's petering out now, and there's some serious quality products that were only really for the Chinese market, and Chinese companies that are a lot of nouveau rich or nouveau riche companies that are buying older manufacturers and then reviving them. And I've got a couple of those in the list as well. But yeah, so that's why I think a lot of Chinese bikes are coming through as really good quality. And a lot of people are still sticking to the, you wouldn't get me buying anything from China. Well, if that's true, then your house must be empty. I mean, you've only got to look at the likes of MG. Used to be a brilliant British manufacturer, now owned by China. The amount of MGs I see on the road are phenomenal. The same with the Korean brand Hyundai or Kia. You know, they used to be utter nonsense, laughable machines that you wouldn't even think about buying. And then they came through with their better quality product, and they attached a 7-year warranty to it. So a lot of people are going, well, they can't be that bad if they trust it enough to put a 7-year warranty on it. And now look, the amount of Hyundais, which I keep calling them, and Kias you see on the road are phenomenal. So sorry about that little interlude, but I had to explain that. So let's move on to the third one, and that is Benelli. Now, of course, Benelli are a prime example of an old Italian name that has been bought by China. The Keyway group, who own Benelli, have a fantastic product there. As far as the 125s are concerned, the TNT 125, the Honda Grom wannabe, I think the TNT is epic. A brilliant bike, will easily do 70 miles an hour, and it rides superbly. Brilliant quality, great sound, nice fun little bike, very well built, absolutely brilliant. No problems with that whatsoever. Now, even the older air-cooled bike, the Benelli BN125, that, the best thing about that is that it had a really low seat height, yet it was still a big looking bike. Now, what I found when I had a motorbike shop is that people would buy Benellis who were either short in the leg, or women used to like buying them because you've got a bigger bike, but it's a 765mm seat height on that, so you could easily get on it with your feet flat on the floor. It wasn't a heavy bike and you could still ride it really well, and that I didn't see any issues with. They were brilliant bikes, very well built, nice and clean, nice and tidy, really pretty design and great to ride. Moving on to the more modern ones, you had the 502 Cruiser. That was a decent enough bike. The original TRK 502 I found was quite heavy and cumbersome for what it was and a bit underpowered for a 500cc, but the new 502X is brilliant. A great bike, and the new 702X is fantastic. I love that bike, and again, all these videos are in the description below. Pop along and have a look and check them out for yourself, and I absolutely love that. Benelli are a brilliant manufacturer, and again, fully Chinese. And with Benelli, that brings me on to Keyway, its mother company, shall we say. Now, Keyway have had some great bikes. They've had some great bikes. Now, this first one I'm going to talk about is a bit of a contentious issue, and that is the Keyway Superlight. That is definitely worth buying. One, because it looks great. If you're into that kind of cruiser style bike, it looks fantastic, it rides really nice, and they sold in droves. The problem is, what I found with a lot of Chinese bikes is that because they were cheaper than the main rivals of Honda and Kawasaki and Suzuki, etc., people didn't look after them as well, and they expected them to perform as one of their Japanese counterparts, but because it was only a cheap bike, they left it out in the rain a lot, and don't get me wrong, they used to have issues with not using stainless steel bolts, so they rusted within a couple of weeks of owning a brand new bike. That was always a big issue for me. Mild steel exhausts that were cheap mild steel and poorly painted, so the paint would flake off when it got really hot and then it would rust really quickly. That was always a bugbear with me as well. And electrics used to be an issue. They've sorted the electrics out. A lot of them are going for stainless steel exhaust, and if they don't and they use mild steel, they use decent quality steel and proper exhaust paint that they never used to use, and they use stainless steel nuts and bolts. So a lot of the issues have now been sorted out. Now, the Keyway Superlight, I've seen some fantastic examples come back in that have been really well looked after, and I've seen some utter dogs because they're just abused. And the problem with the Keyway Superlight is that the good thing about it is that when the X-Lite came out, it's supposed to replace the Keyway Superlight, but the Superlight was selling so much that they kept it going for another 7 or 8 years. They're still making it now, and they're supposed to end the run on that 6 odd years ago. But yeah, so yeah, the Keyway Superlight, a great buy, but look after it. Now, just on that subject, having had a bike shop and seeing people bring their bikes in, I've seen some utter garbage in terms of Yamaha YZFs, MT-01 or MT-125s and Honda CBRs and things like that. Absolute trash. Bikes that are 2008 to 2015 that have come in, bits hanging off them, seized engines, rattly, tappety engines, and panels held together with cable ties and stuff like that. Utter tripe. I've seen some fantastic versions, but some utter awfully repaired both machines, and that's a shame. And again, all that is down to how the bike has been looked after, or in those cases not looked after. And it's the same with Chinese bikes. If people spend £4,000 on a 125, in their head they tend to think, I'm going to look after that, that's a lot of money. If they spend £2,000 on a 125, it doesn't feel as much, and they don't tend to look after it as much. And that is the problem I found with a lot of Chinese bikes. Not in the early days, because they did have issues, but now people just don't look after them, and we are fighting against that stigma that we need to get rid of. I've waffled on too much, I apologise. Let's crack on. The Keyway, the RKF, a bike that was designed more or less to take on the KTM Duke, but at half the price. Brilliant bike, liquid cooled engine, okay for me, but a little bit squashy on the gonad region, but sold in droves, brilliant bike. And the same with the RKV, fantastic bike, that sold really well as well. Now, interestingly, with Benelli and Keyway, they were using 2 spark plugs and sometimes 3 spark plugs for their 125 single cylinder engines, which made them really, really lean, which means the 125s were getting 100 to 120 miles per gallon. That's some amazing technology. You know, 3 spark plugs in a 125 engine. That's just unheard of in your usual manufacturers, isn't it? I mean, that's just brilliant. So yeah, the RKV and the RKF, fantastic bikes. And I've seen, again, some dogs come through, and I've seen some absolutely beautiful ones come through. One of them, a guy tried to jump it. Why he thought he could jump his bike, I don't know, and then wondered why the handlebars bent. He did admit that he jumped it. And then another one tried to ride into the back of a car and bent the front forks, and then blamed the bike. And then when we saw a picture of the car and the fact that the front end was now missing, it smashed the headlight and smashed the mudguard and bent the forks. And he said, oh, the forks are obviously not that good quality. Well, if you're going to ride into the back of a car, I don't think anything's going to survive. But anyway, you know, that was the prime example. They instantly go to, oh, because it's a Chinese bike. No, it's because you rode quite quickly into the back of a car. That's what bent your forks. You bent your handlebars because you tried to jump your bike and then slammed back down and wonder why you bent your handlebars. Anyway, let's move on. Another manufacturer, Zontes. Now, Zontes I've always raved about. Again, I've done lots of reviews, I think on practically every Zontes, apart from a couple of the most recent ones. But I absolutely love them. The T350, the adventure bike, brilliant bike. The original T310, again, absolutely brilliant. They learnt their mistake because right from the off, they used a lithium battery thinking it was all very clever. But they were quite small. And when the lithium batteries turned out to be rubbish, the only thing that could fit in the slot was a 4XLB battery that you put on a 50cc moped. That's the only thing that would fit in the slot where the lithium battery was. So the batteries were underpowered. It just wasn't powerful enough. They learnt that, and with the T350 they changed it. In fact, with the T310 V2 they changed it and put a much bigger battery on. So they learnt their mistake on that one. But there you go. They learnt and moved on. The T350, brilliant. The GK 350, I love that. Lovely bit of torque. Fantastic build quality in all of Zontes I've found. And the reason why is because they always sort of backpedal on their bikes. So they built the 350s first, or the 310s first actually, in China, and then they produced them as 125s. But they kept the quality and the tech from the 350 or the 310 and put that in the 125. So the 125s were always over-engineered and better quality than a 125 technically usually has. And that's what I found in a lot of their 125s. The G125, the GK125, the Z125, the ZT125, and the new scooters as well, the ZT125M and the ZT310M, I think it is. But yeah, all brilliant bikes. The only one I didn't really like was the Mantis. Again, sold really, really well, and if looked after, brilliant bike, but it was an air-cooled bike used with the old non-stainless screw heads because it was really cheap. I think when it first came out it was like 1800 quid brand new, something stupid like that. But yeah, in fact even cheaper than that I believe, under £1,500 I think they were brand new. But yeah, that's what ruined the reputation. They were cheap, and they were cheap and nasty when they first came out. But yeah, Zontes, another manufacturer I would definitely recommend buying. The only thing to look out for I found on the 125s was that getting them serviced properly and getting the valves checked at the right time and adjusted if need be. That was it, really, I found on that. Oh, and the little key fobs. keeping a couple of spare batteries because the batteries didn't last very long in those key fobs, and that's because the earlier versions were constantly sending signals to the bike. So the bike key fob battery didn't last very long, and that's the only thing I found with those. So yeah, let's move on. Blue Rock, which used to be Bullit. Now, there's only really one that I really like. There's one I used to like, the V-Bob 250, like the Cruiser 250. Unfortunately, that didn't last very long. Absolute shame. But the one I think is absolutely brilliant is the Blue Rock, I want to call it Bullit because it just sounds so much better, Hero 250. Now that was the retro scrambler style. They did the 125, which again sold brilliantly, completely based on the fact that it looked superb. And it was more of an off-road bike with the knobbly tyres, etc. But I found that they were a bit style, and that they were also not brilliantly built. The old air-cooled engines were not fantastic. They weren't quick. You know, 50 to 55 miles an hour is about all you'd get out of it. But you'd be happy with that based on the style of bike it was. But it looked superb and everyone wanted to know what it was and was jealous of you having one. The 250 used the CF Moto liquid cooled engine, and that made a massive difference. To me, that rode much better, it felt better, it looked superb, and it sounded absolutely great. So the Bullit, or the Blue Rock 250 Hero, absolute brilliant bike to own, I feel. The only issue I would say with that was the clocks were a bit cheap. They used the same clock that they did on the 125. I think they should have changed it and used a different clock, maybe a digital one, I don't know. But yeah, that was the only thing I didn't like about that bike, the clock. So yeah, let's move on to another one, Moto Morini. Another old Italian name, absolutely epic for racing in the 70s and 80s, being bought out by China and is again revived under the Chinese name. Moto Morini are fantastic. The Escape 650, again, CF Moto engine, absolutely brilliant bike. I love the tech on it, the look of it, the feel of it, the brakes, the Brembo brakes on those were absolutely superb, really sharp. It just felt like a very good quality bike. I did like the CHINESE 650, the Scrambler one especially, not so much the road one, that was a bit, but the Scrambler one, absolutely brilliant. The only thing I didn't like about that was the mild steel exhaust and the cheap exhaust guard. If they'd have just carried on with the stainless steel exhaust, and there's no reason why they couldn't, even if it cost another 300 quid on top of the bike, stainless steel exhaust would have made a massive difference on that. That's the only thing. The rest of it, built brilliantly, rode brilliantly, braked fantastically, sounded epic. That was fantastic, and I really love the Moto Morini Escape. Now the 1200 is coming, and I really want to get my hands on that. I love the look of that. To me, that is going to take on the likes of KTM in their 1290 Adventure R group. Maybe the BMW GS 1200 or 1250 as it is now. Maybe the Triumph 1200? No, it was a 1250. I don't know. But the Triumph Explorer or the Tiger Explorer, that's what they're going to take on. The Ducati Multistrada, they're going to be up there with them. Even perhaps the new MV Agusta. Now again, that is a prime example. MV Agusta, really expensive. Never been one for reliability. Except when that goes wrong, that's really expensive. Now, as you may or may not know, I had an MV Agusta Dragster 800RR. Oh, I love that bike. And I did sell it because I wasn't really using it very much, and I've still got 11 bikes left. But I loved that. However, when I got it, it had a scratch on the back of the fork. It was bad enough for the fork needing to be replaced, under warranty, but the fork needed to be replaced. That was £1,000. £1,000 for a fork, because they were Marzocchi forks. Really? Luckily, I wasn't paying for it, and that was just for the fork. That didn't include fitting. Again, luckily, I had a Jamie that could fit it, but if it wasn't for that, that would have been a really expensive change. So yeah, they all get errors. you just tend to accept them more with the more expensive bikes than you do with the Chinese ones. And that's because, again, of that stigma. People are clinging on to that, and they really, really shouldn't. So yeah, Moto Morini, fantastic bike, definitely worth it. And again, the links for all the videos I've done on these are in the description below. There's a massive list because I've ridden a lot of them. And so let's move on to the next one, and that is Royal Alloy. Now with Royal Alloy, I'm going to be a bit specific here. I like the Royal Alloy. I like the GP125, great bike. The GT was plastic. Again, sold really well, but the plastic thing didn't do it for me. I like the metal body in the GP. The TG, again, looked superb. Very, very good, reminiscent of the 60s version. Brilliant, brilliant bike. But the 300 is the one that I'm most impressed with. The GP 300 was brilliant. It rode superbly. It had that Vespa 278cc engine. It looked great. It was very reminiscent of the older bike. Again, the true hardcore Lambretta and Vespa riders were not interested, simply because it wasn't genuine. But they used it in a couple of films based on, was it the new Quadrophenia movie? I can't remember what that's called now, but they used one in there. And I've seen them in other movies as well. But the Royal Alloy 300, the engine pulls like a train. It rides superbly. The only issue I ever saw was with the TG 300 and some of the GP 300s were the head bearings. When they manufactured, the head bearings were, the way they did it is that as you moved the handlebars on the bike, it slightly tightened it bit by bit, until after a few months the head bearings became too tight and they needed replacing. That's the only issue I had with them. And it wasn't all of them. It was only sort of the later GPs and the TGs. They used a certain head bearing on those bikes. The early ones were no problem. And the 125s didn't have that. And I wonder it's because the 125s didn't have the weight pulling down on that that head unit. I don't know. But yeah, it's the only issue I found with those. And if you go back to Lambrettas, you were lucky for them to make a journey, you know, without breaking down. So, in comparison, everyone who's going, yes, but it's not a Vespa, yeah, the Royal Alloy is very much likely to make it. Now, we had a couple come in that used to have Scamadi scooters, which were very much like Royal Alloy. There was a whole controversy and a whole suing thing going on with Scamadi. Scamadi saying that Royal Alloy were trying to rip them off. Yep, Scamadi ripped off other manufacturers in the first place. That fell apart, never actually went anywhere. But we had a couple of people that owned Scamadis, and they said even though they're based on them, they ride very differently, they don't feel the same, and they were not as reliable. They bought a couple of Royal Alloys off us, and the first day, there was a couple, a Mr. and a Mrs., and the first day they bought them, they rode them up to Scotland, which is a good full day's ride and more. Never batted an eyelid, absolutely brilliant. And that was right out of the box, after it had only had a quick test ride after you PDI'd it. Brilliant bike, absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I've got no problems with the Royal Alloys. I think they're lovely bikes. Again, need to be looked after, and the only issue I found was the head bearings. So on to the next one, and that is FB Mondial, yet another Italian manufacturer that's been bought out by China. They look superb. I've got one myself. They use the Aprilia engine, the liquid cooled 125 engine, and even in the only problem I've got with Mondial is their 300, because it uses a 249cc engine. So people are instantly thinking it's going to perform like a 300, and it doesn't. It performs like a 250. Well, that's because it is a 250. Don't call it a 300. Call it the HPS 250. There's no problem with that. There's no reason why they have to do that. I don't understand. But anyway, the Mondial, specifically the flat track, really well built, looks great, rides great, sounds fantastic. The HPS is the one I've got, the original one from 2017. Looks brilliant, rides brilliantly. I mean, I'm 16 stone and I had, on a private track, over 80 miles an hour out of that. However, they're a little bit small. Great. I mean, for me, it was fine. I didn't have a problem with it, and I'm 5'10.5", 31.5 inches inside leg, as I've said many times. But it was a little bit small for me and a little bit cramped. So anyone smaller than me, superb. But if you're taller than me, go for the flat track, because that is a brilliant bike. They had a couple of issues in the early ones where the engine management light would come on, but it wouldn't make any difference to the way the bike rode. So you just had to reset that and move on. But again, that's under warranty, so you just deal with it that way. But other than that, I never noticed any... Oh, no, yes, the rear brake. Again, on the early ones, the rear brake would suddenly just go, no, no thank you. And that's because it used the combined braking system, that the earlier version of the combined braking system, let's say it's 2017, that would just trip out. The later ones I haven't heard issues of. So they hopefully sorted that out, but the earlier ones used to have issues with the back brake just going no, and indeed bleeding, and because of the style of brake it was, you'd have to bleed the front and the back at the same time, and it was a bit of a ball ache. But that's the only issue I had. Other than that, no problems, and that is a brilliant looking bike, brilliant built bike, great quality again. Oh, the other issue I had was the clock. The clock would randomly change from kilometres an hour to miles per hour. But again, they've changed the clock on the new one. They've gone for the TFT screen version, so that's all been sorted. And that's it. But again, brilliant bike. The Pagani looks superb. Even the MX, the Supermoto version and the off-road version, great bike, same engine, same build quality, but you've got more of an off-roady feel or Supermoto feel. Lovely bikes. Definitely recommend FB Mondial. And that brings me on to Morbidelli. The only one that they brought out in the UK is the C1002V, the cruiser. Again, superb build quality. Now with this one, I'm a bit on the fence. I don't know enough about it. I have reviewed it, but I don't know enough about it and its longevity to say, yes, definitely buy it. But based on what I saw, I think it's a fantastic buy. Time will tell with that one. So maybe shelve that one for now. But again, I don't know what other options you've got, because there's no other 1000cc V-twin motorbike of the cruiser style that you can buy for that price that isn't an old Harley or an old Suzuki Intruder or something like that. So yeah, that's one to definitely watch this space on, I feel. So on to the next one, and that is Lexmoto. Now Lexmoto, again, great, some not so great. The cheaper ones I personally do not recommend. The one I do recommend is the LXR, the sports bike, 125, and the 380. The 380, great bike, pulls well, rides well. I do like that, the Lexmoto 380. The LXS and the LX or the LSZ. LSZ is very similar to the Keyway RKF, very similar to the Zontes ZT 125. But yeah, the Lexmoto 125 and the 380 sports bike, very good bike. Again, I've seen some that have come through utter trash because they haven't been looked after very well, and I've seen some that have had issues. I haven't seen any that have had issues with the 380, but the 125 had a couple of issues. So I suppose this is definitely a recommendation on the 380 and the up-to-date version of the LXR and the LXS and the LS-Z. So yeah, Lexmoto, definitely one to watch out for. The older air-cooled ones, again, they were okay. Similar, like the Keyway Superlight and stuff like that. Good bikes if they're looked after. If they're not looked after, they'll rust quite easily, and they'll get a bit tappety quite easily if they're not serviced properly. But as a manufacturer, the sports bike is the one I would definitely recommend. The other ones are alright if you want a cheap bike that'll get you around, but I'm not 100% definitely sold on them. So on to the next one, and that is AJS. Now AJS, again, an old manufacturer, an old British manufacturer that is still British, but they've been having their bikes built in China since the 1980s. Now, again, they're part of the original crew of Chinese-built bikes, and they weren't coming through fantastically. They had issues with engines, more particularly the parallel twin engine that they had in their cruiser. Not a good engine, that. Awful thing. They went on to put that in the AJS Highway Star. Didn't last very long because the engine was just not very good. Great sounding, great feeling, but it just wasn't very reliable. However, the one I've always liked is the Tempest Roadster and the Tempest Scrambler. Great retro looking bikes. They seem to do anything and go anywhere style of bike. You can use them off-road. As the guy who bought one didn't want it registered because he was going to use it to ride around his farm on. I saw him about a year and a half later and he said, oh yeah, still going strong. He said, I've never registered it on the road. And he just said, it just rides superbly. I use it because he's got the Scrambler version. Use it to go across the fields. Much better than a quad. So much more fun. I love it. I can ride around my land. Brilliant bike. They'll take a bit of abuse, and I really do recommend those. The AJS Tempest Scrambler and the Tempest Roadster 125. The Cadwell, again, was alright. I found it a little bit small for me because the Cadwell is one I looked at when I was looking to buy my FB Mondial, and I liked the look of the Cadwell, but it just felt a bit too small and a bit too leany ovary for me, so I didn't really want to go for that. But definitely the Tempest Roadster and the Tempest Scrambler. So on to the next manufacturer, and that is Sinnis, and most specifically the GPX 125 and the Terrain 125. Now at this point I would probably clump in the Mutt Strave 125, although Mutt don't tend to class themselves as a Chinese manufacturer, even though those bikes are pulled from China because it's a Sinnis Terrain with a different badge on it and a few upgraded improvements. I do like the Mutt Strave and I do like the Sinnis Terrain, although the Mutt is cheaper than Sinnis Terrain, strangely enough. But yeah, great bikes for what they are. Brilliant. 125 adventure bike with the luggage, albeit cheap and small luggage, but it does come with luggage. Great bikes to ride. Nice engine. Originally the air-cooled version, it was alright, but it was slow. They upgraded to the liquid-cooled engine, which they use in the GPX and they use in the Terrain. Once they're run in, you need to take them up high in the revs to get up to 70 miles an hour. If you ride it and change gear low, it'll sit at around 55 and that'll be your limit. If you give it some in each gear, you can get up to 70, no problem at all. Simply because of the way the bike's geared. It's and it was a struggle with the gearing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were very close together, and then 6 was quite far away. So yeah, the Sinnis GPX 125 and the Terrain 125. The GPX is the sports bike, looks great, built well. Feels nice sporty little bike if you take it up in the revs, and the Terrain, great adventure bike. And I'd say I would like to put the Mutt Strave in there as well, but we'll clump them together. Mutt in general, I want to include them, but they don't want to see themselves as a Chinese manufacturer because they take a base bike and then they completely change it and add lots of nice trick bits to it and nice quality bits to it in the UK. So they're technically a half Chinese, mostly British built manufacturer, and they're based in England, Mutt motorcycles. So I really do like them, and I don't want to clump them in this because they're not technically a Chinese manufacturer. And that brings me on to my last one, but there is a bonus one afterwards. My last one is Rieju, or Rieju, however you want to pronounce it. And Rieju, the enduro bikes. Now, Malcolm and I took them off-road with Mick Extance a few years ago in Wales. I've never been off-road before that, and it was absolutely brilliant. It got me into enduro. I absolutely loved it. The Ranger 200 and 300 specifically, because it's a very easy bike to ride. You're not very tall on it, you're quite low, very seated in the bike, rode superbly, love that, great fun. But the Pro version, the two-stroke Pro version, very easy bike to ride, very light. Mick was riding it, and so was his son, who they're taking us out all around his 1,500 acre plot. If you ever get the chance, sign up to that and go and do some off-roading. It is superb. I don't know what bikes they use now. That was a few years ago. The MRT Supermoto as well, great bike. As a 50cc, was superb. 2-stroke 50cc. The only problem is your regulations strangled it so much that the exhaust would eat itself because it would get too hot. But if you take the restrictor pipe off that, it makes it breathe a lot nicer. You can still do 30 miles an hour, 45, but it rode so much better with that restrictor pipe off. Absolutely brilliant bike. I love the Riejus. As an enduro, supermoto, that kind of bike, superb. Absolutely brilliant. I don't know about their road versions. They did was it the Century? The Rieju Century, which was like an FB Mondial HPS, but not as cool looking. And I don't know about that. They used the same engine, the liquid cooled engine. They use the Yamaha engine in some of their off-roader ones. Brilliant bike. Love the Riejus. And that brings me on to my bonus. Now, the bonus is not a Chinese manufacturer, but it's one I think is definitely worth purchasing, and that is SYM. SYM is a Korean brand, but a lot of people think they're Chinese, but they're not. SYM are brilliant. Their 125 liquid cooled scooter is one of the best scooters I've ridden, and I would put that 100% on par with the Honda PCX and the Honda Forza and things like that. They're bigger scooters, they're 400cc, stuff like that. They're quite expensive, but they are superb. Very well built, brilliant bikes, and definitely recommended. And that brings me to the end of my list. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back next time with something else, so please stay tuned for that. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video and click the notification bell for future uploads, and I will see you very soon. So until next time, please ride and drive carefully, but have fun. Bye bye.